Being able to visualize data is an important task for understanding data. Today, we're going to look at charts and tables using JavaFX. In a newly created JavaFX project, we have something that has an empty controller, a very simple view that is pointing to the controller that we are using, and just an empty window. So we're gonna put like something like random generated chart. The purpose of this project is that we're gonna generate a little table like this, where we are gonna have the values that they correspond to each row, and randomly assign values throughout this table. And once we create the application, we can have some methods for automatically initializing controller by using the implementing initializable interface, which what that thing is going to do is that if we implement the methods, we're going to have a method .out.println that initializes. So this method is going to happen as soon as we load the application. So we have this thing and it says initialize. So this is useful for upon first load not having to press a button or something like that to load the data. A couple of things that I need to start adding is I need to, on the JavaFX file, I need to add a row and a column. So I have a 1 by 1. And actually, since I am going to add a column after, now I have a 2 by 1. In my project, I am going to look at the charts, and I'm going to choose just a regular bar chart. And I'm going to add it down here, and I'm going to put it down here. So my chart is in there. And then also I am going to add a table that is going to show us the values of the data that we're going to create. Unfortunately, JavaFX, the editor thing, is not as amazing as other things in JavaFX. But now we do have a chart and a bar. And if we load this guy, things right now are a little bit overlapping, but we're going to try to grid pane preferred column index, and we're going to add the chart grid pane index equals 0 and grid pane row index 0, and this guy also at 0 0. So this will help us put the columns. Okay, so now we have the charts in the different columns. And what I want, actually, I'm going to make the window a little bit bigger. So let's make it 800 by 800, just so we have enough real estate to start playing with this. We can actually bring it down to 250, and theoretically it should look quite well. Okay, so we have our very basic layout. After playing around, just make sure that when you're looking at the sample that you are saying what columns and what rows things go into, and the controller would actually place it, because the scene builder inside of IntelliJ is not that great. Okay, so first things first, in order for us to populate the data, generate the data, because it was, if you guys remember, it was a random set of values where we would be putting like whatever index and then the value. We're going to generate this, what we call the series, or in the chart data, this is going to be a series, and each element is going to be, each row is going to be just a data item. The nice thing about XYChart.Series in Java, we're going to see that it's an observable. It relies on an observable list for for the underlying data. And the important thing about an observable list, just to understand, I want to explain something with an observable list. An observable list is a list of elements that the charts or the JavaFX components will be looking for changes in the data to reflect them in the chart. So that means that we're not going to have to be actively redrawing things into the application every time that we change the data. The data and the observable data allows us to do that on its own. So XYChart series, I'm going to generate, so for this chart series, I'm going to generate an element where I'm putting the item and the value, just like we have in here, the item and the value. So I'm just putting it as as a string and a double, just to determine kind of like a key and a value, if you will. And then I am going to create this new XYChart series, which represents the data, and then I'm going to generate a new random generator, and in that random generator I'm going to determine the size of my int size equals 10. We're gonna put 10 elements in that chart. So for these, I'm just gonna generate the table of values, just to show you to not have to rely on an external source of data. So I am going to put we'll just put it size, and I'm gonna, and since it's a constant, let's just rename it, refactor it to the proper uppercase constant convention, and we're going to generate a double value equals rnd.next double, and then XYChart.Data, we're going to generate each row. Each one of these data rows are essentially are the rows like we have on Excel. Item equals new XYChart.Data, and we're gonna generate, like, say, this integer to string, and we're gonna put the I and then comma rnd.next double. That's essentially what we're gonna put. We're gonna put the index and the next double. So we're gonna iterate, generate a random value, essentially finishing with something like this. Okay, so once we are have generated that, then we need to add that item to get data, add item, and we're just gonna add this new item to the series. So now the series essentially has each one of these guys that was randomly generated added back into the series. So now the series holds all that data, and one thing that we need to do in order for us to pass it to the chart, which we're going to populate first, we're going to set up an effects ID, and the effects ID is we're going to just name it chart. Okay, and in the controller we're going to have at this level bar chart, and we're gonna label it as fxml to link it. So at this point, this directive is telling it to look in the proper controller to link it to this. And after we've generated that data, the easiest way to pass it is to this .chart set data, and we're gonna pass the series. This XYChart.Get.Data.Add series. We're connecting the series by saying, okay, this is how we're going to link it to an observable list. So we get this observable list and then we add our series. And this is the thing that it's going to look for changes. Every internal change, the chart is going to start looking for it. So we're adding the series to an observable list, and that's how it's finding the values. So at this point, we have our chart. Now, how do I prove you that if I was going to randomly start generating the data, it would display on the chart? So in order for me to do that, I'm going to do timer. I'm going to generate a timer. And in that timer, this is just for educational purposes, so that way I can show you that I'm not going to touch the chart. I'm going to just touch the data itself, and that's what it's going to make things update itself. So we're going to generate a new internal class, public class, class background task that extends timer task. I want a task. This is just something that Java provides as a timer. So I'm going to generate bg task, bg equals new background task. So we have a new background task, and here I'm going to have a series to a pointer to the series. So XYChart.Series, say string comma double string, not sting, series, and I can make it public. Well, it's the parent is gonna be able to see it. bg.series equals the series of the chart. Which, by the way, when I generated this and added this reference, the series is still alive, even though that it's out of scope, because the chart is still in scope, given that this guy is still alive. So the series, I'm passing the pointer to the task, and then I am going to set up the timer that it's going to call schedule at a fixed rate, a call, which I'm going to call the background task, and just say that I'm going to delay 0 seconds to start that, and say that the period, why is it not? Oh, since timer task, I need to implement the methods, which is the run part, which is what it's going to be called once I have that fixed rate. So bg dot 0,3000. Let's actually make it like 500 milliseconds. So every time that after I draw the thing, it's going to start a timer that it's going to be calling this function every 500 milliseconds. So actually, refresh. You're going to see now a simple print of the refresh that is constantly trying to do something with the app. Okay, even though that we're not touching anything, we were just proving the point that this timer is happening consistently. So what I want is to be able to change one of these values. Actually, this is silly because I don't need this line. Well, let's put it value. Yes, because I was generating two random values here, so I'm simplifying things. And let's just even change this one to string key equals, just to treat it as if it was a key value pair, because it's an XY chart, so it's X and Y. The data is considered as if it was X and Y. So if I was actually showing you, just to point that out, you can see that it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, just because that's X and then the value is in Y. Okay, so here what I'm going to try to do is I need to find somewhere in this array, I need to find a random number between 0 and 9. So int, let's say replace index equals, we're gonna call a random.next int. Oh, we're gonna generate a new random number generation. RND equals new random. And then in this random, we're gonna just generate a new integer. But I wanna limit it from 0 to 9, so I'm going to limit it to size equals series.getData.size. And because when you're asking for next integers, you can have negative numbers, I'm just going to do an absolute number of that. So now I have where in the array I'm going to replace it. The next thing is I want to get a new value. Double value equals rnd.next double. So now I have a place where I'm randomly replacing it and a new value that I'm replacing. Because I said I was not going to modify the chart itself, I am going to just modify the data. So I'm going to generate a new element saying what is the string, and then the double item equals new XYChart.Data, and we're going to put replace index comma value. And we're going to put this as string comma double. Why is it? Oh, yes, because it's complaining because replace index, actually we're going to change it to string. So we're going to do integer dot to string to send this int into replace index and value. Okay, so now we have our key and our value, and all we need to do then is to pass that value to the series. Get data, and then we're gonna set, and we're gonna say the index was replace index. Actually, because we need an what's it called, an int. We're gonna bring this back to an int. So we're moving the replace index down here. Let me just put it as if it was like elements like that, and because it's like this, I can just leave it empty. That way it's a little bit more readable, and I gotta remove this character. So I'm replacing the index with the item, basically. And now let's see how this thing behaves. I know that it's gonna crash because in Java, you're not allowed to, even though that it's trying to, you're not allowed to to change the application in anything other than the main thread. So what we're going to do is that we're going to use the platform run later method to just create a lambda that essentially calls this. So now we should reload it, and there's not going to be exceptions, hopefully. So now you can see how the data is absolutely changing every 500 milliseconds, and it's automatically updating. The question then is, why did we put then that chart? How can we share values between the chart and the table? Well, let's go back into our initialize function, and then let's make sure that also here we can put another fxml, and we're going to do table view table, and we're going to change this guy to fxid equal. I know why it's complaining. Because table view, this is something to watch for. table view is trying to import. I haven't imported it, and I didn't import it from JavaFX, so I imported it from Swing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm gonna import the class from JavaFX. For some reason it decided that one. So now this thing is gonna work. Silly mistake. And now the table is linked. So what we gotta do then is, how are we gonna pass those values? So we are going to, before we connect things, we are going to, now that we are adding it to the chart, we're gonna generate a table view. Well, let's just generate a table column, and that table column we're gonna name it COL, and we're gonna have a new table column. I'm freaking out about importing Swing stuff. So column, my column. So we're gonna do set value factory, because the tables do need a value factory, which you basically, once you have the data, it just says, how am I gonna treat each column, how am I gonna each row, how am I going to work with. So we're gonna do a new once we generate this new table view factory, I'm gonna call a new callback, and that's essentially what I'm generating an observable value, and I need to create this class that is gonna try to convert with into an observable value the chart that we are creating. So we're gonna get our XYChart.Data, and we're gonna call it D. And because we're getting the parameters, actually, let's look at what we are receiving. If we did this, it's gonna, oh, we need to set the values also. So we're gonna be table my table dot get columns dot set all, and we're gonna set up the column that we have created, and then we're gonna say my table dot set items, and we're gonna pass the data from the series. So now you're gonna see what are we getting in here. So we're getting a table column with a bunch of cell data features, and that is being called every time that we're updating the value. So what we need to do is to convert the cell data features that we had, the parameters, into an XYChart.Data. So if we did that, we're gonna see that the parameter, the value of the parameter is actually storing the index or the label, and then the value that we're trying to generate. So because of that, it's safe to assume that we are going to store it in a XYChart.Data D equals, and we're going to convert it into an XYChart.Data. And here we're going to return a new simple double fact property, because we're just trying to generate the value of this column. We're going to try to extract this guy into a property, since we're using a value factory, and we're going to do we're going to double D get Y value, because the X is this, Y is this. So we're getting the Y value, so that way we can display. We're not really interested in displaying the first column. I mean, let's make this a little bit bigger. table column, let's say. But you can see now, if I rerun this guy, how the values are synchronized and how you can see changes throughout this that reflect the table and the properties just by having the data be the one that synchronizes them and links them. So we're seeing how both the chart and the table both are working together because they are linked through the data. And the data is the observable part that both of them are looking at in order to change their values. I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you around next time.